In my opinion, the Sega Master System is still full of games that can truly use the hidden gem description. Top that off with the Game Gear, and there are a lot of great 8-bit titles that rarely get the attention they deserve. Well, lucky for you, I'm about to talk about just such a game on both systems called Psychic World. Originally released in 1988 for the MSX as Psycho World and developed by Hertz, the Sega Master System version wouldn't appear until early 1991 on either system. It is an interesting release solely for the fact that the Master System version skipped Japan and the US, while other regions got both versions. While Hertz was the original developer on the MSX version, Sega and Sanritsu, who later becomes Sims, ported the title to both platforms and share some team members for both versions. They would later go on to develop some interesting games, but in the near future they would work on other Master System titles like the odd version of Ninja Gaiden in 1992, and then the heavily Castlevania-inspired Master of Darkness that same year. Despite being a port of the original MSX game, they do have some differences. Of course, the graphics are different thanks to the specs of the MSX, but the new versions aren't far removed from that original. The Game Gear seeing the most changes. A lot of music and sound effects was retained, or at least when redone for the hardware, it was the same song or just tweaked for the platform. But the big one was the levels, with the Master System and the Game Gear having levels removed and all the others remixed. The Game Gear again having the biggest changes here. Depending on what kind of gamer you are, that may be a good thing or a bad thing, but let's just say before we get too deep into this video that I like straight-ahead platformers, so I have no issues with the Psychic World ports and the arrangement of the levels. If I had never known about the MSX version, there wouldn't even be a reason to comment on it. Now, Psychic World follows twin sisters Lucia and Cecile who work with a Dr. Navik on ESP research when the creatures they were using in their experiments escape and kidnap Cecile on the way. Navik gives you an ESP booster to enhance your abilities and you head out to save your sister. There are some immediate comparisons to Mega Man released a year prior to that original MSX version. You've got Rockman and Lucia, and with the ESP abilities providing a similar Mega Buster style weapon, and there's certainly something there with Navik, like a weird combo of Dr. Wily and Dr. Light. Both versions follow the same plot and in fact maintain the same cutscenes for the introduction and ending with some differences in the cute little scenes prior to every level. This level of differences continues into the rest of the game with some of the more obvious changes being made for the Game Gear version. Graphically, I can't say one version is better than the other, and in fact they each have their own charms. While it may seem weird to see such different looking versions, especially when the Game Gear and Master System share some things between them and the team is mostly the same on each version, I'm really glad they went this way. The Game Gear version has a much blockier look to it and almost a chibi art style for Lucia. This was likely to better play to the handheld strengths and weaknesses. A lot of games when moved to handheld would either crop in the game and cause the game to not play right, or just retain the original style that could make it hard to track your character on screen. Psychic World avoids both of these issues. The Master System version has a very different look with a lot more of a clean style for the level designs, and Lucia is a completely different sprite with its own set of details. Bouncing between each, I gravitate towards the look of Lucia in the Game Gear version more, which matches the early 90s anime aesthetic of the cutscenes better when compared to the Master System version. The enemy and boss designs are closer to each other between each version with some minor changes to better suit the Game Gear aspect ratio and resolution, but nothing as drastic as Lucia. The levels on the other hand are completely different on the Game Gear, and in fact more was cut from the original than even in the Master System version. For example, level 1 of the Game Gear version, besides the overall different look, blends the first and second level of the Master System game into one long level, going from that flat grassy area to the lava-filled underground that makes up the entire second level of the Master System version. The soundtrack maintains that same idea with each version, mostly the same with some minor differences, which really comes from the level differences. I don't think any of the actual compositions are actually any different, but I want to say that the soundtrack for Psychic World is really fantastic. These are really great tracks. Catchy, full of energy, and really only lacking in some depth with a lack of upfront, punchy percussion from a noise channel. But you have to check out some of the music from Psychic World if you enjoy chiptune. Now, of course, the biggest aspect of Psychic World is the psychic powers. What wonderful abilities does Lucia get with that ESP booster given to her by Dr. Navik? Well, I guess I should actually talk about how the game plays while I'm at it. Those ESP powers can be built up, which is good, because that little pea shooter you start with isn't going to do any favors pretty quickly. You'll find big icons just sitting around the world, as they tend to do, and each time you pick one up, boost that specific power. Grab enough of them and you'll go from a little shot to a bigger shot and eventually one with a spread. Those same icons are also how you acquire new abilities entirely. They will just be randomly placed in the world and sometimes drop from enemies. You'll also grab certain powers from defeating the bosses in the game. Did I mention there are some comparisons to Mega Man? Speaking of, there's a little Metroid in there as well. While you don't have nearly the same range of movement or general depth of Metroid, I can't help but feel a little connection when watching Lucia run full speed across collapsing ground over lava. While there isn't a great need to use a specific power against specific enemies and bosses, some will require it, or just be a quicker death by doing so. There are also a few level puzzles that need a certain power as well to progress. For example, there is fire that will melt ice, and by contrast, another that will freeze water. There is one power you should get quickly acquainted with, and that is your shield that is represented by the plus sign, which is because it also heals you. When activated, nothing can hurt you, and the more you upgrade it, the longer it lasts. If activated, you can use it again to trade ESP for more health. It is very overpowered, but honestly, majorly needed and kind of a trade-off. There are no invincibility frames, so falling to a hazard or getting pinned by an enemy can just suck your health down to 0 in milliseconds, so use and abuse that shield. The biggest issue with the powers in the Master System version is how you select them. Since the Master System doesn't have a start button on the controller, you hold down and press 2 to start the selection process. But bad news, it doesn't pause the game, so you better be quick about it or you'll just keep getting hit while you stand there. It's kinda not great. I'm not a big fan of how Lucia controls in general either. It was something I adjusted to quickly, but I'm also not going to tell you this controls well. Some are just the failings of old school controls and some are just odd choices. I've complained before that I hate having to double tap on the D-pad to run and would rather it be set to holding down a button. You know, like Super Mario. I'm still surprised that every game didn't just do that after Super Mario Bros. Came out and influenced gaming the way it did. Well, Psychic World went for a different approach, an almost Sonic-like approach. If you hold left or right, Lucia just suddenly takes off at full speed. This doesn't exactly work very well for a lot of situations for obvious reasons. The jumping is also a bit stiff with an odd amount of hang time. You certainly get a feel for it and you have okay in-air control, but when paired with the run mechanic, it is easy to not feel exactly in control of your jumping from time to time. But while it is an action platformer, it is light on any complicated jumping moments. In fact, outside of a few screens that actually require some decent timing, which can be brute force with the shield, plenty lean into puzzles or combat. Well, I didn't say it was a perfect game, but despite these issues in context of the overall experience, nothing feels particularly broken. Psychic World is still a solid experience and you shouldn't let some iffy controls keep you from giving the games a try. It lacks a bit of finesse, but it will likely not be any annoyance once you settle in to Psychic World. Now, I've already pointed out some issues and I don't have much else I would call out with Psychic World, but I certainly have some things that are, let's use the word quirky. But I'm the kind of person that finds these little quirks a different layer of charm or fun. Let's talk about the bosses for a moment. Each boss is this dominating large sprite with screen-filling attacks. They look pretty cool too, and you can tell care was put into their design. I think my favorite may be the ice stage boss that has this dragon living in the ice that has an attack of lava that fills the room, melting the ice you need to lay down in order to attack the dragon in the head. But you have to love how flat everything is and how static the boss sprites are for the most part. The Master System certainly had more capabilities than this for large bosses. We see this in the Dragon's Trap, which we released way earlier. But you really have to laugh on how easy it is to cheese these boss fights. Not just due to the shield, though that certainly helps a lot, but also because there almost always seems to be a spot you can stand with that shield in place and just unload on the boss without needing to do much else. That's my pro tip in this episode for you. The game overall just doesn't take advantage of the Master System or Game Gear hardware, looking more like an NES title. But I don't find that to necessarily be a bad thing. I already talked about how I like the sprite work and the art direction overall may be a bit lacking, but it might have been the right call. The game runs very smoothly and effortlessly, which is a great thing. If Psychic World also stuttered with the subpar controls, this video may be very different. So spoiler alerts on this last bit, go ahead and skip forward a bit if you want to maintain some mystery for the end of the game. But I think it's worth talking about the ending of Psychic World. Okay, ready for this? The ending is absolutely hilarious. For some people, this may ruin the game, but for me, it was just a cherry on top of this charming little adventure. So after a confusing battle with the mind-controlled sister, okay, quick side note. I lied earlier. There is one big complaint. The puzzle for the final boss fight is really dumb. Cecile is under control of a big machine, and you need to bypass her to get to the backside and bust up that machine. The puzzle here is vague at best, and not a fun challenge. I won't ruin the whole thing, but be prepared to be frustrated. But after that nonsense, you find out Dr. Navik was behind it all along, just using you and your sister as an experiment. Lucia won't stand for that, and that sets off a transformation of the dock and a Dragon Ball style launch into the air for an aerial battle. The best part is this isn't just a cutscene, which is unique enough for the time on its own. It eventually gives you control back, but you just slowly move back and forth until Dr. Navik crumbles to the earth. That's it. That's the end. It's priceless. Okay, so Psychic World has a few problems and a few quirks too, but overall it's a super fun experience and a solid time. It deserves a lot more attention, and I know I'm going to suggest it from now on when someone wants suggestions to either get into the Master System or for that hidden gem they may have missed. From the charming cutscenes to the fun powers, catchy music, and the towering bosses, it is a super fun adventure. Even better is if you want a more compact title or just looking for more Psychic World, the Game Gear version is great too. Both are worth playing even if you've beaten one or the other. The Master System version comes in around an hour of game time once you know how to play it, and the Game Gear can be half of that. The bad news is the Master System version is kind of expensive for that runtime. I keep running into this problem. Around $75 to $100 for a physical version. Luckily, the Game Gear version is cheap at around $15. I definitely think you should check out Psychic World, and I'd love to know what you think of it once you do, or if you have already. Remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and subscribe if you haven't yet. Oh, and hey, I have a Discord and a Ko-Fi if you're interested, links in the description. That's all for this episode of RetroActive. I'll see you next time.